I was banned from my sister's wedding for defending my wife. My family demanded an apology, but I refused, and then for as long as I can remember, my sister Laura has run the show in our family. Growing up in Clearwater, a small town where everyone knew everyone, Laura was always the one people listened to. She's 3 years older than me and has a knack for taking control of any situation. Whether it was deciding which games we played as kids or organizing family holidays down to the minute, Laura made sure things went her way. Back then, I didn't think much of it. She was the bossy big sister, and I was the younger brother who went along with her plans to avoid an argument. Things shifted as we got older. Laura didn't outgrow her need to control everything. In fact, it intensified. She started treating family events like boardroom meetings, with her at the head of the table. She'd make decisions for everyone without asking, and if you didn't agree, she'd find a way to make you feel like the bad guy. I managed to brush it off for most of my 20s, but it became harder to ignore once I got married. My wife Megan is the kind of person who makes you feel at ease the moment you meet her. She's smart, thoughtful, and has a way of finding common ground with just about anyone. I met her 5 years ago when we were both living in Chicago. Megan had moved there for work, and I was trying to carve out a career in software development. We clicked immediately, and after 2 years of dating, I proposed. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Megan got along well with most of my family right away. My parents, Samuel and Rebecca, liked her, and my cousins enjoyed her sense of humor. Laura, though, was a different story. From the moment she met Megan, she treated her like an outsider. It wasn't blatant. Laura's too calculated for that. Instead, she'd make small, cutting remarks that were just subtle enough to fly under the radar for everyone else. Things like, "Oh, you don't know how we do things here," or, "Well, Ethan always loved my cooking. You must have really changed him." Megan would smile and let it slide, but I could see how much it hurt her. Over the years, the tension between Laura and Megan grew. Megan tried to connect with her, even going out of her way to help with family events and ask Laura for advice on traditions, but nothing worked. Laura kept Megan at arm's length, treating her like someone who didn't belong. When Laura announced her engagement last year, no one was surprised. She'd been dating Jason for about 4 years, and everyone knew a proposal was only a matter of time. Laura being Laura, the engagement was a grand production, complete with a professional photographer and a perfectly curated social media post. She was radiant as she showed off the ring, basking in the attention. Naturally, her wedding was expected to be the event of the year. Laura loved big, showy occasions, and this would be her crowning achievement. My parents were thrilled. Samuel even joked that Laura should run an event planning business with how meticulous she was. I tried to be happy for her, even though Megan and I both knew it would likely be another opportunity for Laura to make things about herself. When the invitation arrived at our house, I remember thinking it felt a little strange. The envelope was addressed only to me, which was odd since Megan and I were married, and invitations usually included both spouses. I opened it, half expecting to find Megan's name somewhere inside, but there was no mention of her. The invite was clear: Ethan Hayes, plus no one. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe Laura forgot to add Megan's name, or maybe it was a weird formatting issue. I called her to clarify, hoping it was a simple oversight. When she picked up, her tone was cheerful at first, but as soon as I brought up the invitation, her voice grew sharper. "Oh, that wasn't a mistake," she said. "We're keeping the guest list small, and Jason and I decided to prioritize immediate family. It's nothing personal." "Laura," I replied, trying to stay calm, "Megan is my wife. She is immediate family." She sighed, like she was explaining something to a child. "Ethan, we're on a tight budget, and we want to keep the day drama-free. You know how things can get." I didn't need her to spell it out. Drama-free was Laura's polite way of saying Megan wasn't welcome. My chest tightened with frustration. Megan hasn't done anything to deserve this. How can you expect me to come without her? "It's my wedding," Laura snapped. "My rules. I don't have to justify anything to you." I hung up feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about respect. Megan and I had been together for years, and excluding her felt like Laura was drawing a line in the sand. I hoped my parents would talk some sense into her, so I called Samuel and Rebecca. But when I explained what had happened, they shrugged it off. Well, it's Laura's day, Rebecca said. She's under a lot of stress, and if this is what she wants, we should respect her wishes. Respect her wishes? I repeated, stunned. You want me to leave my wife at home and go to the wedding alone? How is that fair to Megan? Ethan, Samuel chimed in, his voice firm. We're asking you to be the bigger person. Just go and keep the peace. I could barely believe what I was hearing. Keeping the peace had always been their priority, even if it meant ignoring Laura's behavior. Megan walked into the room as I hung up, her expression concerned. She asked what was wrong, and I told her everything. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she smiled softly and said, It's okay. You should go without me. I don't want to cause any problems. Her words were kind, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She was trying to protect me, even though I knew how much this was hurting her. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Laura treat Megan like she didn't belong. If Laura wanted to exclude my wife, then she'd have to exclude me too. The weeks leading up to Laura's wedding were tense. My decision not to leave Megan behind had solidified in my mind, but it didn't make things any easier. I didn't tell Laura I was bringing Megan. I knew how she'd react. Instead, I RSVP'd for two and hoped that once we arrived, things might settle down. Maybe it would be awkward at first, but I figured once we were there, Laura would have no choice but to make peace with it. After all, it was her wedding day. Surely she wouldn't let something so petty ruin her celebration. Megan wasn't as optimistic. She kept suggesting that I reconsider going alone, even offering to call Laura herself to smooth things over. But I wouldn't let her do that. She had done nothing wrong, and I refused to let her grovel for the privilege of attending a family event. Megan eventually stopped trying to convince me, though I could tell she was uneasy about the whole situation. When the day of the wedding arrived, the air between us was heavy with unspoken tension. Megan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple blue dress she'd chosen, a stark contrast to the extravagance we expected from Laura's event. She looked beautiful, but there was a sadness in her expression that broke my heart. I walked up behind her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll be fine, I said, trying to sound confident. No matter what happens, we're in this together. She nodded and gave me a small smile. I just don't want to ruin anything for you, Ethan. You're not ruining anything, I replied firmly. We're family, and we're going together. That's final. The wedding venue was a sprawling country club just outside of town. It was exactly the kind of place Laura would choose, grand, picturesque, and dripping with luxury. We arrived during the cocktail hour, keeping to ourselves as much as possible. Megan and I found a quiet corner, sipping our drinks and watching the other guests mingle. For a brief moment, I thought we might actually get through the day unnoticed. That hope evaporated the second Laura spotted us. I saw her across the room, her eyes narrowing as she registered Megan's presence. Her expression shifted from surprise to barely contained fury, and she started marching toward us. My stomach sank. Ethan, Laura hissed as she reached us, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the lively chatter around us. What the hell is she doing here? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. She's my wife, Laura. Of course she's here. Her face flushed with anger. I told you she wasn't invited. You had no right to bring her. This is my day, and you've completely disrespected me. Before I could respond, Megan stepped in. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. Laura, I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just wanted to support Ethan and celebrate your wedding. Laura ignored her, turning back to me. This is exactly why I didn't want her here. She always finds a way to make everything about herself. That comment hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe the audacity of it. Megan, who had done nothing but try to fit in and keep the peace, was being painted as the villain yet again. I felt my anger bubbling to the surface. This isn't about Megan, I said, my voice steady but firm. This is about you and your need to control everything. She's my wife, Laura. If you can't accept that, then maybe I don't belong here either. By now, our conversation had drawn the attention of nearby guests. People were glancing over, their polite smiles turning into curious stares. Laura's voice rose, and I could tell she didn't care about the growing audience. You don't belong here, she snapped. Fine. If you won't respect my wishes, then leave. Both of you. The air seemed to shift as her words hung between us. Megan's face turned pale, and I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on us. A few relatives stepped forward, trying to mediate, but Laura wasn't backing down. In a move that seemed both absurd and entirely predictable, she called over a member of the event's staff, security, no less, and demanded that they escort us out. The man, clearly uncomfortable, hesitated before looking at me apologetically. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I turned to Megan, who looked like she wanted to disappear. If we're leaving together, I said, taking her hand. Laura's voice followed us as we walked toward the exit. Good. Don't come back, she shouted, her tone triumphant. We left the venue in silence, the humiliation of the moment pressing down on us like a heavy weight. I drove aimlessly for a while, neither of us speaking. Eventually, we stopped at a small diner on the edge of town. It was nearly empty, the quiet atmosphere a stark contrast to the chaos we'd just left behind. We slid into a booth and ordered drinks, but neither of us had much of an appetite. Megan stirred her coffee absently, staring at the table. I'm sorry, I said finally, breaking the silence. I should have handled this better. Megan shook her head. You don't have to apologize, Ethan. This isn't your fault. I just hate that it came to this. Her voice cracked, and I reached across the table to take her hand. I hate it too, I admitted, but I don't regret standing by you. I never will. We sat there for a long time, saying little but finding comfort in each other's presence. Outside, the sky turned from twilight to darkness, and the events of the day began to feel like a distant nightmare. But I knew this was far from over. Laura's wedding might have been the breaking point, but the real fallout was just beginning. The fallout from Laura's wedding hit like a tidal wave, drowning any hope I had for reconciliation. By the time Megan and I got home that night, my phone was already buzzing with messages. Calls, texts, and notifications poured in faster than I could keep up. At first, I ignored them, too emotionally drained to deal with whatever fresh drama was brewing. But by the next morning, it became clear that avoiding it wasn't an option. The first call came from my parents. Rebecca's voice was tight, brimming with frustration. Ethan, I can't believe you did this to your sister. She worked so hard to plan that wedding, and you turned it into a spectacle. Mom, I didn't turn it into anything, I replied, trying to keep my temper in check. Laura excluded Megan. What was I supposed to do? Leave my wife at home like she didn't exist? You should have respected Laura's wishes, Rebecca snapped. It was her day, Ethan. Not yours. Not Megan's. Samuel chimed in from the background, his tone heavy with disappointment. You need to apologize. To Laura and to the family. This isn't how we handle things. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, Laura gets to humiliate my wife, and I'm the one who has to apologize? Do you even hear yourselves? She didn't humiliate anyone, Rebecca shot back. She just wanted to avoid conflict. You're the one who made it worse by bringing Megan when you knew she wasn't invited. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. Talking to them felt like banging my head against a wall. No matter how much I tried to explain my side, they had already made up their minds. Laura was the victim, and I was the villain. End of story. The family group chat was even worse. I opened it to find dozens of messages, most of them from Laura. She had wasted no time painting herself as the wounded party, claiming Megan had crashed the wedding and ruined her special day. A few aunts and uncles chimed in, offering their sympathies and scolding me for my disrespectful behavior. Family comes first, Ethan. One message read, You should have known better. Another declared, You owe Laura an apology. This isn't about you. It's about the family. I tried to defend myself, typing out a careful explanation of what had really happened. I told them I'd RSVP'd for two, that Megan hadn't crashed anything, and that Laura's exclusion of her was both hurtful and unnecessary. But my words only seemed to fuel the fire. Laura responded with venom. I made it clear Megan wasn't invited. You ignored my boundaries and made my wedding about you. How dare you? Her words stung, not because they were true, they weren't, but because they highlighted just how deeply entrenched her narrative had become. Megan wasn't even in the group chat, but her name was dragged through the mud by people who barely knew her. Toxic? Manipulative? One cousin even called her a troublemaker. It was surreal. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I muted the chat and put my phone down, my hands shaking with anger. Megan, who had been quietly watching me pace the room, approached and placed a hand on my arm. "Ethan, it's not worth it," she said softly. "Let them think what they want. You don't have to prove anything to them." Her words were kind, but I could see how much this was hurting her. She tried to hide it, but the pain was written all over her face. I pulled her into a hug, wishing I could shield her from all of this. A few days later, the situation escalated. Laura took to social media, posting carefully curated photos from her wedding. The captions were vague but cutting. Boundaries exist for a reason. Sad when some people can't respect that. Her friends flooded the comments with supportive messages, talking about how she deserved better and how some people just don't know how to behave. Megan, already feeling ostracized, decided to deactivate her accounts. "I just need a break from all of this," she explained when I asked her about it. "I don't want to see what they're saying." I didn't blame her. Every post, every comment, felt like another jab. Another reminder that Laura was doing everything in her power to isolate us. But I wasn't about to let her win. A few of my cousins reached out privately, expressing their sympathy but stopping short of offering real support. "I think what Laura did was unfair." One text read, "But you know how she is. It's easier to just let her have her way." That was the crux of it, wasn't it? Everyone knew how Laura was, but instead of standing up to her, they tiptoed around her tantrums to keep the peace. It was infuriating. The breaking point came during a family dinner a week later. I went alone, hoping to explain my side in person and maybe find some middle ground. Megan didn't want me to go, but I assured her it was worth trying. The moment I walked in, the tension was palpable. Rebecca greeted me with a strained smile, while Samuel barely looked up from his plate. Laura, of course, was icy as ever, her arms crossed as she sat at the far end of the table. It didn't take long for the conversation to turn to the wedding. Laura wasted no time accusing me of ruining her day, her voice dripping with self-righteous indignation. "You disrespected me in front of everyone, Ethan," she said. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for me?" I met her gaze, refusing to back down. "You disrespected my wife by excluding her. Do you have any idea how hurtful that was for both of us?" Rebecca cut in, her tone scolding. "This isn't about Megan. It's about family. You need to apologize to your sister." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "This is about Megan. She's my family too, whether you like it or not. And I'm not apologizing for standing by her." The table fell silent. For a moment, I thought I might have finally gotten through to them. But then Samuel shook his head, muttering, "Stubborn, just like always." Laura smirked, clearly satisfied with their response. "If you can't take responsibility for what you did, maybe you shouldn't come to family events at all." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I pushed back my chair and stood, my voice steady but laced with finality. "If that's how you feel, then maybe I won't." I walked out, leaving the dinner and the toxic dynamic behind. When I got home and told Megan what had happened, she hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to come between you and your family." "You didn't," I replied, my voice firm. "They made their choice. Now I'm making mine." It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. For the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. Megan and I were a team, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my family, tear us apart. Cutting ties with my family wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing, but after the disastrous dinner, it became clear that staying connected on their terms wasn't an option. Laura's wedding had been the flashpoint, but the deeper issue was their unwillingness to respect Megan and, by extension, our marriage. It wasn't just about a single event, it was about a pattern of behavior that had gone on for years. If they couldn't see that, there was no way forward. For the first few weeks, the silence was deafening. My phone, which had been buzzing constantly after the wedding, went eerily quiet. The family group chat carried on without me, its notifications muted on my phone. Megan and I settled into an uneasy calm, trying to focus on our life together while the fallout loomed in the background. But Laura wasn't finished. A few mutual friends reached out to me, cautiously asking if everything was okay. They'd heard rumors, absurd stories about how Megan had shown up uninvited to the wedding and caused a scene. It didn't take much to figure out where those stories were coming from. Laura had a way of twisting the narrative to suit her needs, and this time, she was painting Megan as a villain to deflect blame from herself. She's really going all out. I told Megan one evening as I scrolled through yet another message from a confused friend. It's like she won't rest until everyone thinks you're some kind of monster. Megan, sitting across from me with her laptop open, sighed heavily. Ethan, I'm used to it by now. People can think what they want. The ones who matter know the truth. Her words were strong, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. She deactivated her social media to avoid the whispers and passive-aggressive posts, but the damage was still there. Her once bright smile seemed dimmer, and she started declining invitations to social events, worried that she'd run into someone who had been swayed by Laura's version of events. The real blow came when one of Megan's closest friends, Claire, messaged her to ask if the rumors were true. Claire had heard from someone in my extended family that Megan had deliberately crashed the wedding to spite Laura. The accusation was so ridiculous that it would have been laughable if it hadn't come from someone Megan considered a friend. She actually believes it, Megan said quietly after showing me the message. I don't even know what to say to her. Then don't, I replied, anger bubbling beneath the surface. If she's willing to believe Laura over you, she's not really your friend. Megan nodded, but I could see how much it hurt her. She ended up writing a short, polite reply, denying the rumors and saying she needed some space. It wasn't just Claire, though. More and more, we found ourselves cut out of social circles that had once been safe havens. Dinners, game nights, casual get-togethers. Our invitations stopped coming. The isolation was subtle but unmistakable. The final straw came when I learned what Laura had been saying behind the scenes. A cousin, one of the few who still talked to me, admitted that Laura had been spreading lies about Megan for years. During our own wedding, Laura had complained that Megan was stealing the spotlight by being too charismatic and charming. She told relatives that Megan was fake, manipulative, and not good enough for me. Hearing this was like a punch to the gut. She's been jealous of Megan from the start, my cousin said, shaking her head. I don't know why, but it's obvious. I should have told you sooner. When I confronted my parents with this information, they dismissed it as family venting. Laura's always been passionate, Rebecca said, as though that excused years of cruel behavior. She doesn't mean half the things she says. Even if that's true, it doesn't make it okay, I replied. Do you know what it's done to Megan? To us? She's tearing this family apart, and you're letting her. Samuel sighed heavily. Ethan, this isn't just about Laura. You've been making things harder by refusing to let go of the past. I stared at him, incredulous. Refusing to let go? She's the one spreading lies and trying to ruin Megan's reputation. How is this on me? They didn't have an answer. They never did. Their loyalty to Laura was unshakable, no matter how toxic her behavior became. Around this time, Laura's carefully crafted image started to show cracks. Her controlling tendencies, once seen as a strength by some, began to alienate others. At a cousin's baby shower, she tried to take over the planning despite not being the host. When the actual host stood her ground, Laura stormed out and refused to attend. Word spread quickly, and for the first time, people began questioning her behavior. Her personal life wasn't faring much better. I heard through the grapevine that her marriage was already on the rocks. Jason, her husband, had grown tired of her spending habits and her tendency to micromanage every aspect of their lives. Rumors of financial troubles circulated, with whispers that their extravagant wedding had left them in debt. Despite all of this, my parents continued to defend her. When they called me one day to ask if I could help Laura financially, I was floored. You want me to bail her out after everything she's done? I asked, my voice rising with disbelief. She's your sister, Rebecca said, as though that explained everything. Family helps family. Not this time, I replied firmly. I'm not rewarding her behavior. If you want to help her, that's your choice. But don't expect me to. They didn't take it well. Rebecca accused me of being vindictive, while Samuel muttered something about letting pride get in the way. But I didn't care. I was done bending over backward for people who refused to see the damage Laura had caused. Meanwhile, Megan continued to handle everything with quiet dignity. She never retaliated, never spoke poorly of Laura, even when she had every right to. Her grace under pressure earned her the respect of a few family members who had stayed neutral throughout the drama. One cousin even told me privately, "Megan's a class act." I don't know how she puts up with all of this. In truth, I didn't know either. But I was determined to make it up to her. If my family couldn't appreciate the incredible woman I'd married, that was their loss. My focus was on building a life with Megan, free from the toxicity that had defined so much of the past year. Little did I know, the drama wasn't over yet. Laura wasn't the type to let things go quietly, and her next move would bring everything to a boiling point. Despite my attempts to distance myself, Laura managed to pull me back into the storm. It started subtly, as it always did with her. Relatives began dropping hints during brief phone calls, mentioning how hard things had been for Laura lately. They spoke in low, concerned tones, implying that her struggles were somehow my fault. "She's going through so much," one aunt told me over the phone. "The least you could do is make amends. You know, for the sake of the family." When I asked what making amends meant, she skirted the question, eventually suggesting I apologize to Laura for the wedding debacle. It was laughable. Apologize? After everything Laura had done? It wasn't just insulting, it was absurd. But Laura's narrative didn't stop with whispered complaints. She found a new way to escalate the situation. A vague but pointed post on social media. It read, "Funny how some people think they're the victims when all they've done is cause harm. Family loyalty is a two-way street." She didn't mention me or Megan by name, but she didn't have to. Everyone in our circle knew what it was about. Her friends flooded the comments with supportive messages, validating her grievances. "You deserve better, Laura," one wrote. "Toxic people don't belong in your life," said another. It was the same tired routine, but this time it struck a nerve. I was tired of her controlling the narrative while Megan and I stayed silent. I forwarded the post to my parents, accompanied by a message. "This is what she's doing. Again. Do you still think I'm the problem?" Their response was as predictable as it was infuriating. Rebecca called almost immediately, her voice heavy with exasperation. "Ethan, why are you stirring things up? Just let it go." "Let it go?" I repeated, barely able to contain my anger. "She's out here slandering Megan and me, and you want me to stay quiet?" "She's just venting," Rebecca replied dismissively. "It's how she processes things." "Well, her processing is damaging Megan and me," I said firmly. "And if you keep defending her, you're part of the problem." That ended the call. I was starting to see a pattern with my parents, one where they enabled Laura at every turn while expecting me to shoulder the blame for the rift in the family. It was exhausting, but I was done playing along. The real tipping point came during a birthday party for a mutual friend. Megan and I debated whether to attend, knowing Laura would be there, but in the end, we decided not to let her presence dictate our lives. The party started out fine. We stuck to our corner, chatting with old friends and enjoying the atmosphere. For a while, it felt almost normal. Then Laura made her move. She approached us mid-conversation, her expression neutral, but her voice loaded with venom. "So," she began, loud enough for others nearby to hear, "enjoying yourselves? Must be nice not having to face the consequences of your actions." The room fell silent as everyone turned to watch the confrontation unfold. Megan's hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles whitening. I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. "Laura, not here. This isn't the time or place." She ignored me, her voice rising. "You've turned half the family against me, Ethan. Do you even realize what you've done? Or do you not care?" At that moment, something unexpected happened. A few mutual friends stepped in, their voices calm but firm. "Laura, this isn't fair," one said. "We've all seen how you've treated Megan and Ethan. Maybe it's time to take some responsibility." Another chimed in. "You can't keep blaming them for everything. This has gone too far." Laura's face flushed crimson as she looked around, clearly taken aback. For the first time, she didn't have the upper hand. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving a trail of awkward silence in her wake. After she left, several people approached us, offering their support. It was a small but significant victory. For once, the truth had broken through Laura's web of manipulation. But the respite was short-lived. A few weeks later, one of my cousins posted a detailed account of the wedding drama on social media. It didn't include names, but anyone who knew the situation could easily connect the dots. The post went viral within days, attracting thousands of comments. Most sided with Megan and me, calling Laura's behavior controlling and unfair. It was validating, but it also brought a wave of attention we hadn't anticipated. Laura, predictably, was furious. She accused me of orchestrating the post, despite my complete lack of involvement. The family group chat exploded once again, with Laura accusing me of trying to destroy her life. Her tone grew more hysterical with each message, and when I didn't respond, she blocked me entirely. The fallout rippled through the family. More relatives began distancing themselves from Laura, fed up with her antics. A few even reached out to me privately, admitting they'd been wrong to side with her. It was a small consolation, but it didn't erase the damage she'd caused. Meanwhile, Megan's family stepped in to fill the void left by mine. They invited us to gatherings, checked in regularly, and made us feel valued. The contrast was stark. While my own family clung to toxic dynamics, Megan's embraced us with open arms. It was a lifeline, one I hadn't realized we needed until it was there. Then, an unexpected opportunity came our way. I was offered a job abroad, a position I dreamed of for years but never seriously considered because of family ties. With nothing holding us back, Megan and I decided to take the leap. Before we left, I met with my parents one last time. I laid out clear boundaries, telling them I was open to rebuilding our relationship if they could respect Megan and acknowledge the harm Laura had caused. Rebecca looked pained, Samuel stoic, but neither of them apologized. Still, I left that meeting with a sense of closure. A month later, we packed our bags and started a new chapter. For the first time in years, the weight of family drama was off our shoulders. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was ours, and that was enough.